say you're combining the Plato with the UFOs, if you do have this transtemporal other thing that's outside of the cave, think about like in our linear space-time or whatever, you have like, a couple of different timelines. One would be that we have like resource abundance and everything is great and amazing. And then the other is, that things get super dystopian. It's like Ready Player One. We all, live in these shanty towns. We have to plug ourselves into the Borg or some VR, game or whatever, just to like, get by. Say these timelines are actually concurrent. If you were like a guardian of the good timeline, you'd probably send people through like a virtue test. Maybe what we're in now is this low level simulation for like, and all we have to do is like contemplate virtue, get dragged out of the cave and like not, kick and scream too much and like enlighten ourselves. And then we become worthy of like the real better world.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. I'm sure many of you have deduced that I have been utterly seduced. Rhyme wasn't planned, but we'll take it, by the UFO topic. But I really think the only way forward from a moderately satisfying philosophical sense-making perspective, at least for me personally, is a multidisciplinary approach. We've got to get beyond government-sanctioned disclosure alone, novelty-evoking tales alone. Don't get me wrong, I am here for all of it. But we've got to go just as deep inside, I think, as we are going outside. And on that note, this approach goes beyond, I think, what most people would even consider to be the UFO topic. This is why I love thinkers like Jacques Vallée, for instance. He brings just a mythopoetic girth to the conversation that I badly wish we had more of. But easier said than done. I mean, it makes sense why people like Vallée are in short supply. You need knowledge of philosophy, consciousness, psychology, the esoteric, and there are precious few who have anything insightful or honestly even remotely coherent to say where all of the above are concerned. But I have to say, my friends, Jesse Michels does it. He has a way of continuously pulling references, names, theories right off the top of the dome in a way that not many mouth noise makers in the YouTube UFO milieu can do. So I am tickled to have him on. As many of you know, he's really established himself as one of the premier channels on YouTube when it comes to the UFO topic. And he also has a way of just getting some of the most elusive guests imaginable on camera. By the way, I do want to mention, Jesse and I will both be at Contact in the Desert this year. They are not a sponsor, but they did offer me a discounted link, which I populated in the description for you if you're interested. There are going to be a number of novel, compelling speakers in attendance. I am personally stoked for it. All of the portals for both Jesse and Third Eye Drops are in the description as well. Like, comment, be sure that you are subscribed, my friends. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, do subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to audio podcasts. We've got hundreds of mind melds with some really brilliant beings, and we would enjoy it if you join the Wonder Lodge over at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. We've got a patron-only Discord server, a book club. We do Zoom hangs. You can get rewards like stickers, pins, shirts, and more, depending on your pledge level. Would love to riff with you there, but presently, let's do so with Jesse Michels. I feel like there are elements of your philosophy, like whenever I'm watching one of your videos, there's always questions I want to ask you that I feel like are like right squarely in the milieu of everything that you talk about, but because a lot of your content revolves largely around the UFO topic, sometimes they never come up. So there's a lot I'm excited to riff with you about, but
I can't wait. And I've seen stuff on your show that totally dovetails with things I think as well. So this should be fun.
Yeah. I was thinking we could be good little Platonists. I've heard you bring up Plato like 4 times, so I'm going to assume that I'm just going to call you that. And we could put this conversation in a sort of like tripartite structure where it revolves around the phenomena, the physics, and the philosophy.
I love it.
I feel like those are like the three things where we'll sort of meet and have a lot to noodle on. Well, first let me ask you this. You've talked to so many different people. You've heard so many different theories. Some theories harmonize with one another. Some theories fly in the face of one another. But I'm curious right now, in terms of the whole, I guess we're in the phenomena stage of the three. Not that we need to stick with any one,
Mm-hmm,
but in terms of narratives
mm-hmm.
surrounding the phenomena, is there one that you find most compelling and most plausible?
I think it's a really good question, and it's I think there are no good theories of everything in this top that encapsulate
Yeah.
UAP or whatever. There are like two or three very locally useful things that I like, that I find charismatic. Like, I'm very interested in the time travel stuff. And then I'm
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
interested in the sort of like the Plato, like we're in like a cave, and you could sort
Yeah.
of, make those two consistent. And the cave is sort of, we live in, 3D, space. And then we have, a fourth, dimension of time. And we're subject to Zeno's era of time, and so like the cave is sort of the fact that we're time bound, and these beings sort of aren't time bound; they're sort of like transtemporal or whatever. So like, yeah, I'd say something like we have an extremely limited scope of like what we can see, and then there are like these kind of hyper objects or things outside of it, that have a little more root access to
Hmm.
the time dimension. Um, would be my best theory. But like, there are probably all sorts of holes in that, and like to make that, consistent with any sort of modern physics theory, requires like probably something way above my pay grade. But um, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I could go on. I could give
Well,
you like a theory of everything. It would just sound really. It wouldn't be condensed, and it wouldn't be neat, and it would be like
for
this
sure.
really schizo like rant.
Well, you've already turned me on in nearly every respect by bringing up Plato's cave this early in the conversation, because I do think that that is one of the most powerful allegorical and mythological templates, and I feel like it's one of those lenses that withstands basically any version or any dimension of reality you want to throw at it. Like Plato himself makes it very clear that it's both epistemological and ontological. Like, there's the whole divided line part of the conversation where that's the epistemological part, where you get into the different kinds of knowledge, but the different kinds of knowledge parallel ontological ascent as well.
Mm,
So like you have your lowest kind of knowing, which is the akin to the people that are stuck in the cave staring at the shadows on the
mm,
wall.
mm,
They're in the lowest dimension of reality, all the way on up to the people who are in the highest, most noetic, fully realized kind of consciousness. And these are the people who have fully escaped the cave, who have glimpsed the sun, in air quotes, or the form of the good. Um, so yeah, but it transcends. I mean, that's the most basic nutshell version of it. And I'm not sure if you know this, my most popular video I've ever made is actually on the cave and like
oh,
the
cool.
different esoteric dimensions of meaning that are there to be unlocked. So yeah.
I've seen that video actually, and I really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
cool.
And yeah, it's really good.
Thanks, brother.
But yeah,
Thanks.
no, that the Plato stuff, like it's like that quote, like all Western philosophy is just a footnote of Plato or whatever,
Yeah.
is pretty. It's probably pretty correct or something. And like, and then the modern, I think, rationalist view is that Plato, is the father of kind of Western, rational thought and inquiry, and the symposium and all the conversations therein was like very, you know, um, kind of this kind of peripatetic dialectic way of just getting at truth, but it was pretty rational. And then I think the deeper you go, in my opinion, the weirder it gets. And like I sort of disagree with our modern kind of rationalist cut on the whole thing. But I do think, I just had this guy on my podcast actually named James Madden. I don't know. You should have him on as a guest. Happy to intro you. But
Hmm. Haven't heard of him.
he's a like a Plato scholar,
Oh,
and but
really?
he wrote a book
Cool.
called Unidentified Flying Hyperobject, and he compares UFOs to
Wow.
hyperobjects, like Platonic solids, like objects that exist
Hmm.
outside of the cave, and like literally like kind of break our brains, like are like impossible to comprehend in our kind of limited epistemological scope, within the cave. But and you talk about this well in your video, like the light, actually you're being pulled towards the light, And I think the objects, in a sense, if you sort of you glimpse the light, it's like this kind of intermittent reinforcement effect of like you become this like rabid pursuer of the light.
Yeah.
And there is something clearly happening there with the UFO thing where if somebody gets into a specific state of consciousness, they see a thing,
Yes.
it's extremely ephemeral. There's like a memory decay function. There's clearly like a game of telephone going on as far as like how they relay their experience. They start to doubt themselves, but it also simultaneously becomes this really important kind of confirmatory thing in their truth searching process. And so it kind of reinforces them. And I think the deeper you get, here's what I would say. So I answered your question very poorly at the top of like, do you have a theory of everything? No theory of everything about the UFO thing can deny that everybody seeking answers on the UFO thing have had probably experiences themselves that they often don't admit publicly, but that are like motivating their kind of more public inquiry or their more quote unquote rational inquiry, where they try to be more scientific about it and they try to separate their own experience from the larger search. But it's ultimately like very autobiographical. And I find that it's like Graham Hancock, like he has to like put on this front to like argue against the archaeologists, and then you're like, Graham, how'd you get into like this stuff in the first place? And it's like, I wrote an article on the Ark of the Covenant and that the fact that it was held in Axum in Ethiopia, and then that got me like really fired up that there are like there are maybe mysteries out there. And then like
Yeah.
then the rest of his career kind of ensues. Or like there's this guy, Sir James Bruce, this explorer who is, part of the, this Freemasonic lodge in Scotland. And
Hmm.
he went out searching for the Ark of the Covenant. And then he's responsible for the Book of Enoch. We wouldn't have the Book of Enoch if he
Oh,
hadn't like
really?
dug it up. Yeah. And so like, I think, we like to now ascribe like these very like objective motives for like why we're doing what we're doing, when like usually it's just like extremely irrational, and like we don't really know ourselves super well, and and we're
Yeah.
being sort of dragged along.
Yeah. 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 I'm so tempted to get into like where this notion eventually takes the Platonic lineage, because I think the overlap between where this ends up going and the modern day UFO phenomena, particularly once you bring in this notion of psionic assets and needing to occupy a certain state of consciousness to attract certain things, this sounds almost indiscernibly different from this this mysterious practice that all of the sort of technical parts of the praxis are basically lost of, called theurgy.
Mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but before I go there,
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more about Madden's sort of thesis on how these things overlap, because there's something really, really specific that this is pointing to for me, but I'm wondering if he goes there in his book. So yeah, tell me more about his thesis
He
if you
doesn't get
remember.
into too much like theurgical celestial ascent like
Yeah, yeah,
practices.
yeah.
Um, it's more like he gets into Plato and the idea of a hyperobject and a cave, and the fact that that's probably what this UFO thing is. It's like this extremely ephemeral thing, and all of these people imprint their low level kind of meme sphere library that they have at their disposal on this primordial thing that they don't quite understand. Then he brings up Heidegger, the question concerning technology,
Hmm.
which is an essay that I could tell you I understand, but I don't. It's
Yeah,
extremely confusing and convoluted. But I think he understands a little bit better than me. Um, and
yeah.
yeah, it's a really cool book. It's like nobody the modern kind of Western university professor is like not allowed to like do stuff like
Hmm.
that. And he just like kind of broke the taboo and did it. So I like
I'm
that.
gonna have to look into that for sure. And yeah, I would love to be connected with him.
Yeah,
Um,
I got you.
so so where this is taking me is, so there's a couple different sort of within, it's so crazy, man, because even within Platonism you get these big divergences from major thinker to major thinker, but there's the guy who is most associated with this practice of theurgy is named Iamblichus.
Yep.
He's sort of the major Platonist who comes right after Plotinus. For people who are foggy on this, we're talking like 200 to 300 Common Era. But anyway, this guy really adopts what looks, from our modern perspective, more like a Western esoteric, like ritual magician kind of disposition, while also being a philosopher. But in one of his most famous works, called, like, the main title is like usually On the Mysteries, but the full title is something like On the Mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about, tell me if this sounds familiar, Jesse. He talks about how the theurgist essentially attracts the gods down through these, like, either emissaries or through basically like attracting the soul vehicle of whatever the deity is that they're in relationship with, to a point where they basically become like a vessel for this archetypal consciousness. And there's more to it than that, but this notion of attracting like a soul vehicle or some kind of phenomena associated with an archetypal being through ritual practice and through like deep dedication, doesn't that just sound so much like being a psionic asset, like under a different, totally different cultural milieu?
Yeah, you're asking really good questions. I think it is the same thing. And there were, it's like, yeah, ancient Kabbalistic celestial ascent practices. And, there are rumors that, Ezekiel and Enoch and Paul and all these people sort of, in this kind of cut, in this, interpretation, all of those people sort of engaged in these things. And then Iamblichus engaged in them probably in the most kind of systematic way, and like had like his, hierarchy of beings. And you can even see in one of his, like
Yeah.
deities, you see like irradiated light as like the, what you experience, which just sounds like modern electromagnetic radiation damage. Like maybe that's what St. Francis of Assisi experienced when, he was on Mount Laverne in 13th century Italy. And he, this angel Sephiroth or whatever, little winged orb thing comes down and
Yeah.
burns him. So yeah, I think there are a lot of, I think it's probably the same thing. And then you have to ask yourself, is that something you want to undertake, individually? Is that like an individual process that you're kind of hermetically called to? Or, is that something that can really be done or systematized under the auspice of some, like government thing? And
Right.
you get into like other kind of ethical questions there. And I don't claim to know the answers. I don't know much about that world. It's sort of, it's supposed to be like hermetically sealed and you're not supposed to talk about it. And, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is.
Or,
Yeah. I think you're making very, very good connections.
friends, I want to tell you about something I've been trying for the last couple of weeks. Magic Mind reached out to me and they asked if I'd be interested in trying a 14-day trial of their mental performance potion. And first, let me say, I am no stranger to nootropics, so I needed to see the ingredients. And upon looking at them, I was really impressed. I thought, let's see what's up with this. Especially with all the research and editing I've been doing as of late, I've been looking for something exactly like this. And on the note of ingredients, that is one of the things that I greatly appreciate about Magic Mind. It is not just a caffeine dump or an energy drink. It is a whole harmony of complementary ingredients like L-theanine, which gives you this nice, smooth sense of calm, I find, ashwagandha, rhodiola, and probably my favorite ingredients, functional super shrooms like lion's mane and cordyceps. And speaking of that 14-day challenge, I'm about 7 days in now, and I find that I'm just flowing from task to task a lot more smoothly, which is wonderful because I'm typically a just disgusting procrastinator. But don't take my word for it, my friends. Try it for yourself, especially because they've got an insane deal right now, 50% off. But you have to use my code ThirdEye50 and or go to our URL, magicmind.com/thirdeye50. Totally risk-free. They give you 100% of your funds back if you don't like it. So again, code THIRDEYE50, URL magicmind.com, THIRDEYE50. Yeah, or you're at least supposed to be initiated into it. And until you're initiated into it and have some kind of experience for yourself, it's one of those things that you can't really talk about. And that's what's interesting about like almost adopting the Plato's cave allegory as the cornerstone of a personal philosophy is you basically have to start from this place of radical epistemic humbleness. Like you have to understand like you are in the cave. You are the person looking at the caves on the wall, the shadows on the wall, thinking that it's real until you are and a lot of people, wrongly sort of mash this idea up with what happens to Neo in the Matrix, right? Even though in some ways it does overlap pretty well, but Socrates in the actual story throughout is constantly reinforcing the idea that the person in the cave does not want to escape.
Mm.
Like he's not this heroic figure who's
Mm-mm.
trying to get out. He
Mm-mm.
talks about basically like we're all so comfortable in our illusions, in our comfortable little, cushioned beige mundane reality where we know the name of everything and everything is the way that we expect it. And to be removed from that is innately uncomfortable.
Mm.
So it's always like, some unseen force breaks the chain and then he turns around and sees who's casting the shadow on the wall and that freaks him out and then he has to get dragged out of the cave. So it's always like that and it's never like the person is at least initially extremely stoked to have this new level of knowledge. There's like a requisite sacrifice or discomfort that comes along with receiving the knowledge. And then, of course, the whole thing wraps up with now it's kind of this freer, more enlightened person's duty to go back down into the cave. But then ultimately, the mob in the cave rejects him and kills him. Like
Yep.
they're not like, "Thank you for freeing us." They're like, "No, we don't want your wisdom. Like we're comfortable in our illusion."
Yep.
Um, yeah, it just works on so many levels, man.
Yeah, no, there's some like translation function issue between like, you can't sort of communicate what you've seen from outside of the cave. It's like literally incomprehensible. And then you come back and you get persecuted and, it seems super, like you think of the Republic as just kind of a response to
Yeah,
Socrates' death or whatever. And so maybe that was like super, super affected, the whole book, right? And the Republic, I mean, and which, the cave analogies in that.
yep, hmm
And then is Socrates just part of some like larger scapegoating cycle archetype where you try to pursue trans-political truth and the state always wants to be the mediator of truth
right,
and it's sort
right,
of impossible to circumvent that, and if you do, that's always the center of violence is when you go right at the truth. So yeah, it's sort of this age old like archetypal story. And you could it's a veneer that most kind of is widely applicable or generalizable to like any time or any sort of story arc.
totally,
um
totally. Yeah. Side note: if people haven't read the Phaedo or the Apology, or at least don't know the broad strokes of it, absolutely. I think for anybody who's philosophically curious, those are just absolutely foundationally important things to read. That's even where so many of our, I think, preconceived ideas, like metaphysical ideas, come from, or at least were popularized in. But what for you personally do you think is the most pulling out of the cave moment, or maybe some pulling out of the cave moments that you've been hit with that sort of changed your view of reality, or made you a different kind of person fundamentally after they happened to you?
yeah, I have them all the time. I feel like my
Wow.
process somewhat accelerated because I'm sort of forced into doing this stuff because it's my job now, to like where
Yeah.
I get really jaded all the time where I'm like, there's like nothing here. This is ridiculous. Like all these people are like, they're crazy, because the UFO space is full of the weirdest characters that like, and like half of them seem like they have ulterior motives and the other half seem like liars. And like, there
Right.
it feels like there are very few like, just honest, reasonable actors. There are obviously, but it's hard to find. And so I get super jaded, and then like often it's in the context of like doing a show, like something magical will happen, and like somebody,
Wow.
somebody brings up something really trippy, and you're like, whoa. And I've had that a bunch of times, like meeting this guy Robert Hastings, who is, for me, it's often because I'm coming from a, like a venture cap, a traditional kind of finance
Yeah.
world or whatever, and in that context, I would have to like vet people for how high agency they are, and like how likely they are to like be able to do anything in the real world, and how
Mhm.
rigorous they are in their thought, and how lucid they are in their thought. And so like I try to like like what's the intersection between that and then like crazy claims. And like
Mhm.
every once in a while you get somebody who's just like this guy Robert Hastings, who wrote this book UFOs and Nukes, you know
Oh, yeah.
very 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 reasonable, meticulous, detail oriented journalist, and then like a repeatable pattern where UFOs consistently show up around nuclear sites. You have over 170, or I think it's 167 to be exact, Q cleared, ICBM security personnel,
Mhm.
radar operators, guys that work at nuclear bases across, the US and otherwise. And so that just like blows your mind. Or like, so that's like, the one case where you get like, you have high agency person, who's good at what they do, and then they're making a crazy claim and like they can back it up. And then
Yeah.
that's like on a more systematic level. And then sometimes like just anomalous weird shit happens where like that's crazy synchronicities all the time,
Yes.
actually, on when I'm covering this stuff, where like I'm interviewing Lou Elizondo, and in DC, at this randomly, my videographer happens to book on Peerspace this Freemasonic lodge or whatever that like,
Oh, cool.
then like I didn't even remember that the first half of our interview, which I wasn't able to let out for stupid, I guess, like political reason. I don't quite understand why I wasn't able to let it out, but it was like 2 years before that. I didn't even, I forgot that we spoke about Freemasonry and how intertwined with like NASA and early NASA stuff and like space
Interesting.
exploration it was. And so we're at this Freemasonic lodge, and then the groundskeeper of the lodge was a witness of the 1952 DC flyover. And like
Whoa.
I actually like it's so weird at that point. And as a viewer, I might be like, did you choreograph this? That's insane. And with God as my witness, and Amar from Yes Theory, who's like this really nice, he's not
Mhm.
trying to pull off psyops or whatever. Like all of that is just happened. And I've had a bunch of things like that. They're just really weird. Where it's
Well,
like,
one might have just happened while you were talking, dude, because either you had a bug or a dust particle or like a little tiny orb flew by your face, and it was clearly on the camera. So
whoa.
that'll be fun. That'll be fun.
Well, let's
Yeah.
get people to investigate.
Yeah, and the thing that was interesting is it flew on like fast and like a fast trajectory right
Like, I
past
want to
me. It
play
was
that back.
very
I
it was
didn't even
very
notice.
tiny. I'll definitely, yeah, no, I'll definitely 23 minutes in. Yeah, I'm gonna look
Engaging
for it
in
for sure.
theurgy, on the show.
This has happened one other time where I was talking to somebody about something extremely novel, and then something just zipped past in the frame, and I'm like, dude, did you like? I have it, and I got it. I replayed it and everything on the episode. But anyway, yeah, man,
Yeah,
I totally relate to that idea that when you go out on a limb and you go toward weird things start to happen,
they happen more.
synchronicities start to occur, especially, and I notice you travel a lot, you do a lot of your shows, it seems like, either going to people or they're coming to you. And I definitely find, I think I brought this up to Chris last time I talked to him too, that synchronicities are revved up during travel
I
for some
agree.
reason. Yeah. Do you have any like other crazy ones that stick out?
Dude,
It's always hard
I have so
on the
many. I
spot,
I
but
was just with Chris in New Mexico,
yeah,
and we were looking into some crazy stuff on the UFO front that I can't quite talk about yet. But it was this big UFO investigation there, and I'm
yeah,
on my plane back from New Mexico, and there's a little bit of turbulence as we're landing. I live in Austin, Texas, and
mhm,
the pilot goes on the PA. He goes, we're experiencing some turbulence, and UFOs actually seem to be chasing the plane." And everybody on the plane
what?
is like, "What?" And he just goes, "They're coming in fast." And everyone's like, "What the fuck is this guy talking about?" And the flight attendant walks by, and we're like, "Did he just say that?" And I'm like, "I think he did." Like, I don't really know what he meant by that. And anyways, afterwards, I like
What?
went and I grilled the guy, and like he was fucking around, like he wasn't,
Okay.
the pilot, or
Yeah.
it wasn't a real
Yeah.
thing. But when would you ever hear a pilot on a
Right.
commercial plane saying UFO? And he was the most deadpan I've ever heard. I mean, we were flying from
Yeah.
New Mexico, but still, weird thing to
Yeah.
say and do.
And just the fact that you and Chris are on the plane, who are like two of, the most
He was on. He was
prolific
on.
and
He had
yeah.
flown to
Oh,
Montreal
okay,
actually,
okay.
so
Yeah.
I was flying to Austin, but
Still. Yeah.
just strange. Yeah, I don't know, a bunch of things like that, and I hesitate to. I don't know. I feel it feels a self-indulgent and like b meaningless and c, like maybe slightly compromising in the the telling of everything else. But it's the most honest thing is to like admit that you've had
Yeah.
you have to go. You have to like go as far back as possible with your own epistemology and kind of you can't. You have to just like be extremely honest about everything you experience, and that I think that's the problem with a lot of the UFO people is like they all like don't want to admit that they experience anomalous stuff, and then like 5 or 10 years in they'll tell like the partial
Yeah.
version of their story, and they can't tell the full story, and it's just
Yeah.
like it's fine, it's all good, everybody is motivated by some like weird irrational autobiographical thing. We're not these like perfect local optimizers. Like
Mm-mm.
that's not the way
No.
humans work.
No, yeah, it's either what you just said or it's the opposite where they want to think everything is mystical, everything is synchronous,
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
they
yeah,
see in the
yeah.
sky is a UFO, and that's like an equal problem. And I was going to
Exactly.
say this before. That reminds me of the catch-22 that we were glancing up against earlier, where you're talking about, essentially the most mentally stable people who would know if stuff is going on or have seen things going on because they were within some kind of classified program. But then, by virtue of them being on the other side of some wall that is opaque to us as the interested observers in the UFO phenomena, it's always be like, but what if it's a psyop? Because they're on the other side of this wall where they know something and they could be involved in something that we are unaware of. So there's this catch-22 that emerges where the people you need to come forward are those people, but those people are innately distrusted by the UFO interested public because they're coming out of that world. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, this is so true of Elizondo. This is true to some extent of Grush. It's true of anybody who's been on the other side coming over and saying, okay, I want to tell you the truth now. They're immediately looked at with this like vitriolic
Yep.
suspicion. And to some degree, I think it's fair. And to some degree, I also think it's like, is this what you wanted? Like, didn't you want somebody from there to come
Yeah.
over and tell you the truth?
There's
So that's a tough thing to
there's
grapple with,
no
I
way to
think.
do it. I mean, think about
Yeah.
the psychology of like an intel person or whatever. Like, Ed Snowden is like really persona non grata. Like he's really
Yeah.
like, seen as like a total traitor. He's seen as like this complete like, like like I got lunch with this guy Michael Pillsbury, who's this like China expert. He's been in every like admin since like Nixon as like the China
Yeah.
guy. Like he's a little right leaning, so I don't know if he was in the Biden admin, but he's and even there, like when they go, like as an emissary to the PLA, like they really respect how much he knows about their tradition. He knows, he's fluent in Mandarin. He knows the history,
Wow.
and he was saying like he was like, I was like asking like, how do we know like what Xi, how do we get inside of Xi's brain? How do we know what he's thinking? And he was like, well, in 2013, well, before that, like we knew it was up. And then in 2013, it was like, it went dark. And why did it go dark? Because like, Snowden, like let his,
Wow.
all of his stuff out or whatever. And so I have mixed thoughts on Snowden. And I think there are, I don't know. There's like an idealism there that's like interest
Yeah.
that I find admirable, and I think there was clearly overreach. When it came to the NSA having a backdoor and all these tech companies that like we weren't aware of. But then you have all these other things as far as foreign entanglements that like second order effects, right? And so
Hmm.
if you like know anything or find out anything about the UFO thing and you're on the inside, just like let's like a priori I say like the UFO thing is like extremely real. Like it's probably this like Archimedes lever for like nature of reality, and there's probably some
Yeah.
subset of the government that like understands a lot more about it than like the rest of the population. And so like you're kind of an insider outsider, right? Like you've stumbled into, you know, this like exciting thing. But like you weren't like initially formally read in, you know, maybe you investigated it, or maybe you were formally read in, but you were on the outside or something, you know, whatever. Like the psychology of that person in that context isn't going to be like, I'm going to like dump everything I know, you know, on a, you know, a mass public scale. It's just not.
Hmm.
And so like you have to like start with the kind of the foundation that like we have no Ed Snowdens in this space. And then it's like, what can you do? Like, you know, outside of that, like what you can probably try to do is like the Grush thing where it's like you're really
Hmm.
trying to like get the executive, like push them into like a bind. So like they say something because they have like the top of the pyramid view on like all of our equities or whatever. But yeah, I think on some level, like that's like inherent, you know, like you're not gonna get you're not gonna get much better than that. And then on you know, the more skeptical view is like, you know, some of these guys like Rick Doty and stuff, some of these guys are just
Yeah.
like, you know, flood the zone, like weird, you know, they have ulterior motives. And the UFO thing is like the perfect use of like James Jesus Angleton like ran CIA counterintel for like 30, 40 years. And UFOs are like the perfect like thing for passage material because like
Yeah.
they're this like tabula rasa like blank slate thing that like
Yeah.
you superimpose like all these things onto, but
Yeah.
they're it's really this like amorphous thing, right? And so like, you know, one, I don't know, maybe like JFK was killed around UFOs, but if I was E. Howard Hunt and I like wanted to like throw people off the trail and like make people, you know, E. Howard Hunt is a famous CIA spook who like on his
Hmm.
deathbed was like, you know, JFK was killed over the alien presence, right? And then like James Jesus Angleton was probably involved in the, you know, the MJ12 docs, which are these documents that like say there's this like committee, you know, Vannevar Bush, you know, Nathan Twining, you know, Hoyt Vandenberg, all these guys like, you know, early on in like the elite American scientific and military, you know, who are like dealing with the UFO issue for Truman and Eisenhower. If I was James Jesus Angleton, and I was trying to like throw people off on on the JFK
Hmm.
thing, which like he probably had some involvement on like what actually happened. I would like say that it was UFOs, and then like that becomes this passage material thing where like
Yeah.
UFOs like, you know, show up in all these different, you know, places. But you know that's bullshit. But it's also this like really ephemeral thing that seems like, you know, it's like the rings and the Lord of the Rings. Like it's like this thing, this ultimate, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
conferral of power to like any possessor of this stuff. So, you know, I'm maybe the MJ12 is real, and I think we might get some more evidence to the to actually the idea that it is
Mm.
real and there is some sort of committee. But then on the flip side, it's like this stuff could be used really well for like this passage material thing. It's this sort of like,
Yeah.
you know, blank slate that you can kind of superimpose anything onto. And
Totally.
like, and it's, you know, is the stuff that like, you know, one question I would have, you know, about like you're talking about the Neoplatonic, you know, or like the Theurgy thing, the things that like are blobby, like, you know, like plasma-y things that we're seeing in the air
Yeah.
due to like mental connections. Like does that really, do you really think those come down and then we like retrieve them and then they like exist in like hangars at like Lockheed, you know, at
Right. Right.
right Pat or whatever?
No. Yeah.
Like maybe, I don't know, but like I have somewhat an allergic reaction to thinking that that's possible. Maybe it is.
Yeah, dude.
I'm totally open to it, but you know, maybe there's some weird kind of conflation there as well. So,
That'd be so
and then
crazy.
I think when you get deeper on like, you know, some of the you know, true stuff around this, it's I think you just get into the parapsychology stuff because the parapsychology stuff is upstream of UAP. You know, it's
Yeah.
like you have these like air pockets of consensus reality. Like actually, you know, the wave function collapse has more to do with the mind than meets the eye, or you know, than the physics community would admit.
Hmm.
And then you know, from there you get into like all sorts of weird ontological, you know, truths and territories that like UAP are just the like one observable phenomena that like are allowed by that model of reality.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
We're brushing by a few things I want to zoom in on a little more. One, I'm really sad I didn't make a joke about a crescent roll fortune real quick when you're talking about Pillsbury. Two, you brought up plasmoids.
Yeah.
And that is something that I just suddenly saw come into the UFO zeitgeist, where just suddenly everybody's talking about plasma and plasmoids, and it's just like become a buzzword
Yeah.
where I've never really seen a good reason why people are talking about it. So if you have more insight on that, I would like to hear it. And two, you were kind of alluding to this notion that you think that there might be more to MJ12 than people think.
Yeah.
So maybe going reviewing what that is a little bit and why it's so central to UFO lore, and then if you can elucidate that a little bit. But first, let's start with plasma,
Yeah,
because
sure.
I want to know what the fuck is going on with plasma and why that's like suddenly dead center in the UFO zeitgeist and everybody's talking about plasma. Because
Yeah.
I've asked a few people and I've never gotten a very coherent answer.
I don't think I have a super coherent answer, but like I think there's some released NASA even videos about like plasma balls seeming to interfere with manned space shuttles in the past. If you look at like, you know, even the videos surrounding some of the Jersey drones or whatever, like it seemed like they looked actually a little bit more like plasma balls. You know, a lot of these things look like, you know, these sort of amorphous orbs or whatever. And so I think
Yeah.
just observably, like the plasma ball thing does come up. You can fake plasma balls with high energy lasers, and we know that, you know. But like you know, that does seem to be empirically, you know, one of these things that shows up maybe around the mental connection and maybe around the nuclear, you know, thing as well, and then seemingly in these sort of space interactions. And then I
Yeah.
know more sort of philosophically, like it seems like plasma, you know, plasma is the fourth energy state,
Yeah.
and it's inherently very uncontrollable and erratic. And if you think of like the progress of, you know, human progress, like you know, you would probably think like taming plasma in some way would be like, you know, a next frontier. You know, like we've
And
done it with solids, liquids, gases, and we really can't with, you know, plasma is like
yeah.
extremely hard to sort of control, and then it's only used in a propulsion context, you know, with in space.
Yeah.
But there are probably all sorts of
I'm
other use cases we have for it. Yeah, go for it.
I'm just vaguely remembering this now, but there was some paper that I saw going around where they were talking about how plasmoids exhibit behavior that seems to be consistent with having some level of consciousness.
Yeah,
But the other thing is that they are contingent upon or coming off of some kind of larger atmospheric or planetary system. And I don't remember the name for it, but they were almost, I think, I could be conflating two different things, but they were almost seeming to imply that there might be some agency on the part of that atmospheric system creating these plasmoids. And that in and of itself is mind-blowingly interesting for a number of reasons. But
yeah.
yeah,
It's super interesting. There are all these like electromagnetic and plasma based, you know, theories of the universe. Like it's all, you know, it's surrounded by plasma or whatever, and dark energy and dark matter are fake. And like, and I'm like too dumb to like understand these things. There's this guy Wall Thornhill who had like a theory like that. And there's a what was his book called, like Plasma Sky. I'm gonna botch it, but I have a book around, you know, around that. I don't know. I'm like too dumb to understand that stuff. But it's plasma is really interesting. It's almost like a random event generator, but like a physicalized version of it or whatever, where,
wow,
you know, random event generator is like tied to, you know, it's a software tied to like something that's, you know, conventionally thought of as random in quantum mechanics. And like you
yeah,
look at like a plasma, like, you know, even in like one of those like jars or whatever, it looks just like super you know, uncontrollable and erratic. And
hmm
then, you
hmm
know, if the random event generator can be affected by consciousness, then like why can't the plasma? And like I don't know, I haven't done enough research
wow,
on it, but
yeah,
you know, yeah, it's interesting.
it is. Okay, so now going back to the MJ12 stuff,
Yeah,
can you say more about that, or is that like something you're noodling on that you're
it's something both corroborated by this. So this, I think a lot of truths come out. You know, there's this book called Crypto's Conundrum by a guy named Chase Brandon. You would like it because it kind of connects the Plato thing with the modern UFO
okay?
thing. So Chase Brandon was a CIA liaison for Hollywood, and Chase Brandon's a pseudonym, and he went under that kind of moniker. And he writes this thing in the beginning of the book. It's the Francis Bacon quote, like some truths are so hard to, you know, swallow, they must be written in fiction or whatever. I'm paraphrasing.
Mhm.
But then he goes on to you can think of Francis Bacon's New Atlantis as a version of that, where it's like super, super sort of prophetic in some ways. And Francis Bacon himself is very interesting. But so Chase Brandon goes on to write about a committee, and this committee is sort of doing like timeline adjustments,
Mm.
so like they're thinking at that level, which obviously we don't think of anybody in the government at thinking at that level.
Yeah.
And if you think about who is on, so the Majestic 12 is this group, um, that was rumored to be advising, Truman and Eisenhower on the UFO issue. And it's all the usual suspects back then, headed up by Vannevar Bush, but Don Menzel, who's an astrophysicist at Harvard. Gordon Gray is sort of doing the, political and PR management for this group. He's, president of University of North Carolina, the CIA guy. Like a lot of these guys, he actually oversaw the kangaroo court that stripped Oppenheimer of his clearance. And you have, a lot of these guys kind of high up in science and the military and policy or whatever that are governing the UFO issue. And so Chase Brandon writes about this, but he calls it the committee. And he says they're doing sort of timeline, adjustment stuff. And I don't have like super hard evidence that that's like a thing. But I did interview this guy, Harold Malmgren, who was an advisor for JFK, LBJ, Nixon, and Ford. And he sort of hints that maybe it was a thing. And
Mm. Wow.
yeah, and so more to come on that. But like
The timeline part of it specifically, or just MJ12 was
just MJ12
okay.
might have been sort of a real thing. But then he says that, they're sort of guardians of like these sort of like really important secrets of the world, like, and like, so
Mm.
it's like it feels like sort of time, like if you think about like what's the least commoditized thing, it's not gold, right? Like these are all human artifices, they're constructs, like money, any commodity is, the truly least commoditized thing is time. And so if you're at all able to interact on that layer, like whatever these observe, these beings like showing up or whatever, you could probably do some timeline editing. Maybe we're in some sort of timeline war or whatever. And this is all extremely speculative, but in the Chase Brandon book, you have this whiz kid who sort of comes out of the Office of Strategic Assessment, which is an offshoot of the Office of Strategic Services, which is pre-CIA, 1942 to 1945, and like he's this whiz kid, and he's like helping them analyze these like timelines, and
Mm.
he's given this celestial object, and that object sort of confers like great power to him, but it also like allows him to like see, it's this crystal thing that like allows him to like see the future. And it's
Wait, this is a potentially fictionalized version of something that could be real
yeah, I
in
mean
some
that part
capacity.
seems so beyond like my
Right.
ability to like say it's definitely real. Like, I mean that's crazy, right? But like uh I think Chase Brandon had some truths that he hid in the fiction, and I think they're probably like if you read his account of Roswell, for example, that's being vindicated by all these whistleblowers, by this movie, The Age of Disclosure, like all the kind of official
Yeah.
disclosure stuff seems to be vindicating his like account of Roswell. You could say those are two autocorrelated fake sources. I don't think they are. I think this, all these entities have to let this stuff out now, and so that's why to the extent anybody feels like there's some contrived push going on in UFO world,
Mhm.
I think they're trying to get in front of like this thing bursting at the seams in the information age with like AI, where you can like query anything, and like your ability to like research these things is just going to get like so much
Yeah.
faster. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, did you get a chance? Did you see that film at South by?
I
Age of
actually didn't.
Disclosure?
I wasn't able
Okay.
to see it. Yeah. Have you
Yeah.
seen
No,
it?
I didn't. Yeah, no, no, I haven't. I
Okay.
haven't. But yeah, I don't think I have said this at any point, but Jesse and I briefly met during South by this year, and I kind of thought you and Chris may have seen it, but we didn't get a chance to talk
Chris
about it.
saw it. I
But
I didn't see it.
oh, he did. He
Yeah.
did see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. Has he told you any of the? Are there any like major bombshells you think that are going to
Yeah,
come
so
as
so so
revelations from
so
that
the
film?
reason I brought up the Roswell thing is I think it's like they say that there were like four beings in the Roswell crash, and
And who is saying this? Do you know?
I think it might have been Eric Davis. I'm not sure though.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then I think they say it's like it's like there's like two crashes happen. It was like a series of crashes, which that sort of comports, that checks,
Mm.
with the Chase Brandon thing. So, and then as far as other things from that movie, I don't know. I mean, I think Eric Davis and Hal Putoff are talk a lot, and they're obviously fascinating,
Oh
scientifically
yeah.
rigorous,
Oh yeah.
figures. So, and then I think you even have like Jim Clapper like saying, this stuff is real, and like that's a former director of the CIA. So
Wow.
that's definitely a big deal. I'm sure for like a large percentage of people that just begets more distrust.
Right. The catch
Um,
22 again. Yeah, the catch 22 of like the exact people you want to come forward and
yeah,
say this shit are saying it now, and they'll be looked at with suspicion. And
totally,
rightfully so to some degree. But
totally.
just living in the cognitive dissonance and the uncertainty of that, I think, is just where we're going to have to be on this issue,
Yeah.
because we're going to have to be interfacing with these people, like I said before, coming from the other side, divulging this information, figuring out what we want to do with that.
Oh,
Before we get too far away from Hal Putoff,
well,
though,
one more thing I want
don't
to
let
say
me
about that,
forget.
which is
Yeah,
I think there's a very big difference between like front running a narrative and like having an ulterior motive and spreading false stuff. And like I
right.
think there's way more ulterior motives in UFO world than people realize, and there are way less actually falsities. People think it's all
Mm,
fake, and actually I think
yeah.
a lot of the stuff is just hidden in plain sight and real and just really hard to stomach. And then there are way more ulterior motives than people realize. So it's like
Mm,
that. It's not disinfo. Like that's the wrong word. It's
right.
probably correct info, but it's like probably there's probably some controlled
Yeah.
opposition, like front running the narrative. I'm sure a lot of that shit's going on for sure.
Well, on that note, one, I'd love to hear an example of what you think some of those ulterior motives might be. But this also leads me to a question I always want to bring up whenever this conversation, is broadly circling this phenomena. In this topic is why. What is the why now of it all? Why is the government suddenly coming forward, seemingly encouraging disclosure to some degree? Is it because there's something on the horizon they can't control? Is it because there's some other actor that's going to come out and reveal something that they can't control? Uh, is it because if we go down the rabbit hole of, look, this is really all black tech we already have, and we're going to have to let it out soon. So we're going to have to slowly start laying the ontological red carpet out for it, so that this isn't just like, oh, yeah, by the way, guys, we can time travel and, like quantum, whatever kind of quantum weirdness is now suddenly just going to be part of reality, whatever. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think it goes to some of the sort of it's very hard to control information in today's age. You have this like indie podcaster conspiratorial space. You don't have like three outlets like NBC,
Yeah.
ABC, and CBS that you can just like totally control, right? Like the CBS logo is like the all seeing eye or whatever. It's like these things were like
Yeah.
intel fronts or whatever, and like
Yeah.
they had their talking points and like that's not a thing anymore. But also, like, I think you have to ask the question, why not? I think there are plenty of people, like, even from a national security perspective, if like any of this stuff has been instrumentalized towards, American offensive or defensive capabilities, like, if Russia and China have caught up at all, why would you continue to keep this stuff like clamped down in secret like that? That doesn't make any, that doesn't make any sense. And like the CCP can like show up at a scientist's door and like just take them to like work at a thing. And here
Right.
you need some a priori like kind of you need some like foundational knowledge to be like widely distributed across the US among like young STEM students. If they don't even know this exists, like that's actually maladaptive from a national security standpoint. So they're actually like
Mm.
very real, just basic self-preservation reasons for like the government to want to popularize this. I think there's like a meaning crisis. So,
Oh yeah.
like I think like to the extent the government can kind of front run that and like, how like great. I think technology and science have stagnated. Science specific, like really, like the world of atoms is like stagnated. It's all
Yeah.
information technology. So like you could inspire that. You could um, you could call it a threat, and then you get like like all this like funding for like defense. Like there are all these reasons why somebody would like want to get in front of this and just let it out partially. Not the full stuff. But I think maybe the biggest psyop of all is that like there's somebody in government who like knows everything, who has this like top of the
Yeah, yeah.
pyramid view. Um, most of the people who I've met, I've gone pretty deep on this, and like I've met a bunch of people in government around this stuff, and it's like there are people I've met who like other people on the kind of who the periphery of this topic, like they think those guys are like the godfathers of this stuff. And then, so I do. And then I meet them and I'm like, they don't know everything.
Yeah.
They don't,
Yeah.
they're sort of like going off a lot of the same stuff as me, and other people. So on the outside. So, yeah.
So on the point of people who seem like they know a shitload, Hal Putoff, man.
Yeah.
Hal Putoff is one of those people who, if you gave me a suitcase full of money and were like, who are you investing this in terms of knowing some shit? It's like a large portion of that money is going toward Hal. I know you know him to some degree. I don't know how well you know him, but do you have that feeling as well that he just has such a long history in either being directly involved or directly adjacent to so much of this phenomena-based stuff that
he's brilliant and like, finds himself in some very interesting circle. He moved from like the Stargate, SRI, Stanford Research Institute, like, psychic spy stuff. And then he started getting to like, more heterodox nuts and bolts physics and UFOs. And then he became part of this like advanced theoretical physics group with, Oki Shannon, the, head of special projects at Los Alamos, and Ferris Williams, and who else was on that? I don't know. This sort of like, John Alexander, this sort of like think tank around like, can we get to the bottom of the UFO issue? That's probably somewhat of a limited hangout. And then from there, like my guess would be like, he's sort of, passed whatever tests he was given, because he's just so smart. But like, I don't know with him, he's like, he's clearly really, really brilliant. He clearly is onto science that like, the mainstream doesn't know. And then on the UFO issue itself, that I don't have like a ton of reasons to believe that's like stepwise more, intimately understood by him.
Okay.
That's like, he has these frameworks for faster than light travel, and, why it works in a general relativity context. And then, he's interested in different models of, tweaks to classical electrodynamics. And, he has sort of patents in this world of quantum comms that involve killing the E field and the B field of like a radio signal. And then you're left with these potentials, and you can confer, you have information transfer with the potentials by, introducing like a phase or whatever. And, like all that stuff's pretty cutting edge and like very interesting. But even with him, like, does he have some super top of the pyramid, like understanding of exactly how the world works? Like, as much as anybody, but like, I don't know, as much as anybody I know, but I don't know how much that is. And he's obviously has that like kind of cheeky, ability to, not disclose, what isn't, adaptive from a national security perspective, because that's the world he comes from. But yeah, he's always been really, really great to me. So I like him a lot. And, yeah.
Can you say how you got connected with him?
Yeah, sure. I was working. This is actually a good thing to answer, because like people have like conspiracies as to like how I got him on the show.
I wonder how you get people in general, man, because you do an amazing job of getting people on camera. That I'm always like, damn, how did you get Grush? How did you get Barber? You get people.
Yeah, well, thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I'll start with Putoff, and then I'm happy to answer those other two. But yeah, for Putoff, so this is really funny, because like I just interviewed Stephen Greer. There are like a few like keyboard warriors on Twitter and Reddit who are sure that Peter Thiel, who I worked with in his family office or whatever, are like he's like trying to build a UFO, or he's part of the UFO legacy program. Like it's literally, for me, I think there's even like there's some term, I should look it up, where it's like, if you know more about a thing than a journalist, that shows you how, like, that's where you like start to realize like how dumb like a certain journalist is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this was like
Yeah. There.
a really good, it happened in real time where Stephen Greer goes, and I know that, Peter Thiel invested $150 million into Hal Putoff. And I'm just like, Stephen, where'd you get that? And he's like, well, I had a back channel with Eric Weinstein and blah, blah, blah. And I heard about it and blah, blah. And I go, yeah, like, Stephen, I set up that meeting and we met with Hal and we were super interested in this stuff. I mean, I was, and I tried to relay my interests to Peter, and he like wasn't interested. We didn't do the
Yeah.
thing, and he didn't invest in the Soul Foundation. I wanted him to. Like, there's so many things I've wanted him to support that, like, he wasn't interested in. So, good example of like, like, I just love those people that, I don't know, yeah, like do
Yeah. It's
a
like
little bit deeper research, but
I think on some level it's natural to look at like proximity and be like, okay, this is close to this. But as any person who has any modicum of critical thinking knows, is correlated variables are not causative or necessarily indicative of anything.
yeah,
So I think it's in the same way it's natural to question, well, why is this person coming forward with this information? Are they trustworthy? I think to a degree it's natural to question, well, what is that connection?
it's
Is that
also
involved? But
I take it
making major assumptions is always fucked up.
I take it one step further and say it's like and this, I hope I don't come off as like rude here, but it's like a low agency, high agency thing. You're like, how did you meet all
Yeah.
these people? I fucking reached out and I expressed interest, and I was
Right.
like deeper on their stuff than like probably you are, and like not you, Michael, you're very deep, but like, the Twitter keyboard warrior person or whatever.
Yeah.
And like I took initiative, and that's it. And it snowballs where like you get to know somebody's work, and then they feel seen or whatever, and then they have a good experience on your
Right.
show, and they introduce you to the next person. And that put
Yes.
off thing, and him taking the risk of coming on, which he gave me like full, like there was no like I have to see the cut or whatever, which is really, really, great of him. Helped as far as getting more people on, but that was just, I met him around bringing him into the office, and then that didn't materialize into anything real,
Okay. Okay.
investment wise or anything like that. It wasn't even an investment thing initially. It was like, let's do a curiosity conversation. Let's try to learn if there's a there on the UFO thing. And he's the guy that comes up who's like very deep on this. And then the investment came up as an opportunity, and it didn't materialize.
Can I ask what the investment would have been in?
I don't even know. I don't even remember. I mean, I think it was this quantum comms thing that he
Okay.
pitched us, and I'm sure part of his interest was like, oh, maybe I can get some financing for my thing.
Yeah.
So
What do you have any idea what this quantum comms thing is, and what the envisioned technological outcome would be?
I don't really know how it works, but
Okay.
it's some sort of like you can, so like it's this idea, like extended electrodynamics or whatever. It's this thing that always comes up in the UFO world.
Yeah, I vaguely.
Yeah, I mean,
but
I don't even know if it's
yeah.
real, but it's like
Yeah, right,
like
yeah.
scalar field, and so you have these like wave types that like don't, they're not your traditional transverse Hertzian waves, and so they don't decay like 1/r². Maybe they decay 1/r, or maybe they barely decay at all. And so because of that, you can get like really, really fast comms that don't, say they're
Yeah.
trying to do underwater comms, like with the salt water, like the electrons pair off. And so with with one of these exotic wave types, you'd be able to do like, comms underwater,
Like
or like deep space
way better,
comms.
way lower attenuation,
Yeah,
faster
lower attenuation.
speeds, all of that stuff. Okay,
Exactly.
gotcha.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
super cool. And like, I probably thought it was like, at the time, I probably thought it was fake. And now I think there's like way more, for me, I'm not vetting this stuff on a super first principles basis. It's like vetting it, that I hear it enough from uncorrelated, credible sources. And I'm like, I think there's probably a there. So yeah,
So-
maybe we
so-
should have invested, but didn't.
Yeah, that man, if that would work, that'd be insane.
Pretty
'Cause you
cool,
could-
right? Yeah.
You could
kind of
well, you could potentially, like, I won't get deep into this on the recording, but before I did this full time, I was like a network and security person. So the idea of the practicality of a wave that could travel really far distances uninterrupted, that's how your Wi-Fi works, friends. Like it's all on radio signals. So if you could have a super low attenuation, like solid stream of data that can just move unbroken through vast distances, I mean, think about that. You could do everything unwired. It would be massively important if you could do that.
Yeah,
But
totally. And it might deal with the epiphenomena of thought as well, because everybody talks about transmission theory of consciousness, and that, we're nodes of something higher or whatever. And then you go like,
yeah, yeah,
how are we nodes of anything higher? Like, you're in a Faraday cage and you can still think. So you're not like, what's being like there's like one long range force that we can manipulate, and that's electromagnetism. And gravity we don't know how to manipulate. So at least according to
yeah.
the consensus, right? And so this would be like some possible like model where, like, we would be like transmission nodes for something else. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think whatever, that receiver theory of consciousness or transmission theory or whichever direction. It's kind of like the conversation we are having before about uploading versus downloading. It's kind of bi-directional depending on your perspective. But I think whatever it is, and maybe this would be a good portal to go back in time, and also Hal is a good portal to go back in time, because one thing you see if you look into the history of all the psi phenomena
Mhm.
is this obsession with getting to a mechanism. So okay, we're demonstrating that we seem to be able to psychokinetically influence things and remote view and do all of these things that break either break physics, or there's some element of physics we haven't identified as being related to how this is possible. So then they start looking at everything on the electromagnetic spectrum and seeing, well, could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be this part of the brain? And from my understanding, the best candidate or a potential candidate for a while was is it ELF waves? It's like a super
Yeah, extremely
long,
low
slow.
frequency. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Kandre Puharich and all that. Yeah.
yeah, Puharic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Puharich.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, or
yeah.
however you say that.
Yep.
And also, I think that was posited in "Stalking the Wild Pendulum" by Bentov, that there's this like really, really, very, very long wavelength frequency
Yep.
that's like one oscillation every 40,000 kilometers or something like that. So this idea that you could like transmit, there could be some transmission, uh, you know, around the world in like one of these very slow moving waves, potentially. Um, like, because I remember they did do some experiments that were successful, apparently, putting psychics deep underwater in submarines, because like the only thing that could get
Yep.
through that was like these ELF waves. Again, I might be
Yeah,
conflating
no.
multiple stories
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
but yeah, and see, and this is why Putoff is interesting, because he was interested, or he was involved in this stuff back in the early 70s, working for this contractor you mentioned, SRI. um, and he has been basically, from my foggy knowledge of his whole biography, he's been involved in something anomalous basically since back then, it seems like,
Yeah.
whether it's physics or it's psi phenomena, or UFO stuff, or maybe the relationship between all of those things, that sort of seems like it's starting to emerge with things like psionic assets. But
Yeah.
yeah, what do you have any further thoughts on that specifically? This
No, I mean, he's a special scientific mind, and I'm grateful he exists. And sometimes I wish he would, come out with more, but I understand why he doesn't. And he probably needs to operate within the context, he's operating in.
Yeah,
If you take what we're talking about at face value, like the quantum comms thing, there's no way you can work on that in like a without some like top cover, and like without yeah, like that's obviously going to be super dual use, and like you'd probably want to like create it and then like make sure it's not going to be super destructive, low barrier to entry thing, or like
yeah.
weaponized against you from an adversary perspective. And so yeah.
I've been, so speaking of this era in the 70s, I've been I think there's a few primary reasons, but one, as anybody who's been listening for the last, I guess 6 months or so knows, I went to Monroe Institute,
Hmm.
did the Gateway Retreat. Which are you doing?
I want to at some point. I'm trying to make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I want to
Cool.
go back and do more stuff there. But
Cool.
so I did that. I did have a profound experience with that.
Amazing.
Um, and so then I started going down the Monroe rabbit hole, and the Monroe rabbit hole is directly adjacent to and kind of in part of this Project Stargate rabbit hole, which Hal Putoff is also squarely involved in.
Mm.
And for people that don't know this history or haven't been following, um, this is a time in American history where we can say with certainty that they were doing wide, maybe not widespread, but consistently doing classified study and praxis of psychic phenomena. So remote viewing, PK, looking at the physics of all of it
Mhm.
and trying to put it into actual use during the Cold War to spy, to do different things. And it seems like there was a reasonably high level of efficacy demonstrated through remote viewing in particular. And if this sounds like really just sus lore to people who don't know this history, this basically goes on in an unbroken way for 25 plus years at least, from the early 70s with the initial investigations by the CIA and at SRI, eventually into this program at Fort Meade run by the DIA and the Army, where I think at least dozens and dozens of different people go through that program and
Mhm.
work as remote viewers for the Army with varying levels of success. And now, that officially gets axed, or publicly very axed, as part of all of the church committee stuff, um, and congressional oversight into previously very black programs that were not a good look once they came out into public.
Mhm.
But so the conventional story is all of this ends in 95, but then, here we are in 2025 having people like Barber come forward and saying like, yes, there is this program with psionic assets, and now there's all these other rumor and some corroborated stories, like with people like you just had him on your show, the Marine.
Michael Herrera.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so, I mean, to finish my blabbering up, one of the things that I'm so centrally curious about now is I don't believe that in 95 these programs ended. That may have been the sort of like
Yeah.
sacrificial lamb to make it look like, look, we're stopping this.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I have to either think there were other programs looking at this stuff, using this stuff, or maybe they go into the private sector where it's like contractors and it's not directly within the Army or whatever, the CIA or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not even
What?
convinced that the programs that we know about, Grill Flame, and
Yeah,
there's
there's another.
yeah,
Yeah,
Stargate there. Yeah, so it's like I'm not even convinced, I don't remember what the budget was, but it's like low tens of millions over
yeah,
like a
right.
23-year period. And then you hear about OSAP and ATIP and like it's $22 million. And like
Hmm, hmm.
in the world in which, UFOs exist in a nuts and bolts way, and the psychic stuff is vital, and that's believed at like the highest levels of government, there's no way we're spending those dollars amounts on those things, those dollar amounts. And then like the reason that it was sunsetted under Ed May in 1995 was that like there was no defensive capability against it, which makes no sense,
Yeah,
right? Like
right. Yeah,
there's so many
right.
things we spend tons of money on in the National Defense Authorization Act that like uh there's no defense against the thing. It's only offensive. It's not defensive. Like if it's only offensive, you still want to get that much better than the only defense is to get better at the offense, right? Like because
Right.
like
Yeah.
China and Russia are going to get like way better if you think the thing is real. So yeah, the whole thing is kind of ridiculous, like taken at face value. So yeah, I agree with you. It never ended. Even at Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they say there was remote viewing later as part of OSAP. that isn't
Mm.
some big reveal, because like you just have to think of all of these programs as like this, maybe quasi limited hangout, operations. And maybe at their inception back in the day with like 1972 with, Pat Price and, McMonigal and all these guys, that was like the vital program. But you have to think that the real stuff was getting cleaved off to something even deeper. Would be my guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and they by the time it was done, there was a pretty standardized way of training fairly significant amounts of people. Like I think Ingo Swann eventually writes a whole training protocol that is now declassified that you can find online for how to train it, like what the 6 or 7 stages are, uh, whatever. So yeah, I mean, maybe one of the best ways to keep something secret at a certain point is to bring it out into plain sight and make it seem like there's not all that much going on there. But I've heard McMonigal make a good point that at a certain point, it's a remote viewing session that you never get feedback on, or that you never get corroborating intelligence on, is essentially not worth the paper it's written on, because you never know if it's going to be accurate if it doesn't yield you some actionable result. So I do think, like, if I'm being critical thinking, it's an ontologically way bigger deal than it is an intelligence deal, I think, potentially. Because yeah, ontologically, fuck, okay, consciousness is not bound to my body. I can remotely view or experience something that's happening anywhere else in the world, or maybe even on other planets, if you're going to believe some of those stories. So that's insane.
Yeah.
But from an intelligence point of view, we got to be able to not hit it with a satellite. We got to be able to not get a person in there physically. We got to be able to not have a source, because all of those things, immediately whether or not it's real.
Yeah.
So it's really only valuable from an intelligence perspective if it can reliably get somewhere where something else that is empirical cannot get there.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just the bottom line if you want to find the prosaic explanation. But I kind of just still, that with how far we've come scientifically, if there was even a limited program where this is being done, we have to have made so many strides, man. I mean, just off the top of my head, like, imagine coupling it with technology, imagine coupling it with, or drilling down with people who are really, really successful at it, and
Yep.
just continuing to hone it. There just has to be elements of it that have improved over time. And then the psionic asset thing is just another potential piece of evidence of that I think is pretty compelling.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think there's just a lot of the random event generator stuff where it's like, if you can affect this random quantum
Mm-hmm.
computer, it's not quantum computer, random binary classical computer tied to something that's conventionally thought of as random in quantum mechanics, that sort of changes everything. And yeah, no, I think you spend a little bit of time sort of looking at all this stuff, with the McMonigal stuff, his stories, and it's like there is a there. And it is curious. You asked about timing. That Stargate stuff came out in 2017, which is the same year that the New York Times article came out. So like it's interesting that both of
Yeah.
those sort of started to experience their resurgence in the zeitgeist in 2017.
Mm. Yeah, and that's when Annie Jacobson's book came out too. It was 2017.
That's fascinating. I
And
didn't think about
and
that.
that's right around the time Third Eye Spies came out too.
That
Like, they all came
right,
out right around the same time.
right. I thought that was a little later. Or was that 2017?
I think he was recording it around then,
Okay.
because I know, because they're talking about. I
Wow.
rewatched it recently, so I didn't even know that Targ was directly responsible for getting. He and his son, who seemed to be a lawyer in the beginning of the film,
Hmm.
they seemed to be responsible for getting a lot of the stuff declassified
Oh,
personally.
interesting. I didn't know that.
Um,
Cool.
yeah, there's this scene where they're sitting there, and he's like, kind of like, "I'm really glad I could help you do this, Dad." Like,
Oh,
whatever. Um, so that might have something to do with it, is like there was this trove that finally got declassified. So like, if you were in the know, you suddenly had access to this whole just ocean of documents that actually show a lot of these things.
yep. Yep. Yeah.
Have you
Yeah,
Have
it's
you?
yeah, go
Oh,
for it.
sorry. Go ahead.
Well,
I was
I've
going to
always
say.
found it interesting. Like Targ is kind of a UFO skeptic, and then Putoff's
Mm,
obviously, as deep as it gets, or it seems, at least from a not like official legacy person, but like as deep as it gets from my perspective. So like that's interesting as well. Like one seemed to move into the UFO stuff, and the others like we still have no high resolution imagery. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
I haven't heard. I haven't heard Russell talk about it at all. I haven't really looked
yeah.
for his commentary on it. But yeah, that is interesting. Um, I was going to ask if you've heard any rumblings or have any theories on what you think the connection could be between, you know, the end in air quotes of the psi research and the 2025, oh shit, there's something called psionic assets or P3 assets or um I just always think it's so funny because every time I say that, I think about the peanut butter protein P3. You know what I'm talking about?
That's
It's
funny.
like
No, I don't even
that
know.
one's
It's like
taken.
some brand, CPG brand or something.
Yeah, it's just some like protein, like peanut butter protein. I don't know.
That's
Um,
hilarious.
but there's obviously all the stuff about like Herrera, who you just had on the show.
Yeah.
There's the all the stuff about the GATE program,
Yep.
like the gifted and talented program, potentially grooming or identifying and grooming, and then that acting as some sort of like way track to get these kids into some kind of a program.
I think it's a thing. I have interviewed one psionic asset, and we're trying to figure out ways to. It's a lot of these people deal with the memories in ways that reflect normal dealings with any sort of traumatic experience, and so they're shards, and they don't sort of like they don't have the full picture. And
Wow.
so, but there are enough of them for me to think there's definitely a there. Um, as far as these sort of like initiation levels for tracking, kind of Stranger Things style, like
Yeah.
pick a card or whatever, like basic parapsychological experiments using kids, and then they show certain prowess, and then they like make it to the next level, sort of thing. And so yeah, I think more and more on that is going to come out, and it's very interesting. I don't know what I mean. Like my like first cut that if you're a human being has to be like concern, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
what is that? It sounds a little off. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't. It's a frustratingly opaque topic. There's a guy named pseudonymously named Martin, who I think UAP Gerb, who went on my show. He's a great UFO researcher. He said, I
Yeah.
think he's
He's insane. Yeah.
so yeah, he's amazing. He connected this guy Martin with this guy Jordan Jozek. So I think I'm allowed to
Yes.
say
I
this because he made that
Yeah,
connection.
no. I knew that actually,
Okay.
yeah. And I figured that out. Or actually I think one of my friends
Okay.
told me this. So it is,
Okay.
yeah, it's no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think it's public at this point. I also know that through Jordan, but I would want to protect, the direct
Yeah.
relationship but I think UAP Gerb has said this, and I think other people have said this. So
So that's who you talk to?
I've spoken to Jordan, yeah,
Okay.
and so he's super cool guy, and like actually like deeply philosophical on the parapsychology stuff.
Cool.
And he has a super fascinating story of like being shown this. I'm blanking on like the woman's name, but it was like this orb that was they had a name for the orb, and there was clearly like this mental
Whoa.
connection. And I think he it really the whole thing. He was compartmentalized from his experience, but then he became pretty depressed later in life due to some other circumstances. I think around a relationship or something, and that reintegrated. And
Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
I'm certain of that.
You're certain. How certain are you?
100%.
I mean, Jordan, that's a pretty bold statement. Where does that certainty come from?
That certainty comes from my firsthand experience in what I term a psionic exploitation program between the years of 2005 and 2010, where I interfaced and worked with non-human intelligence and things like UAP directly.
Fascinating. And then I interviewed another guy who, we're working together to kind of build corroboration on the story. And I don't know, maybe I can do some combined thing with Jordan and him. I don't know, but I do.
Is he also part of Barber's squad?
I don't know, or
Okay.
I can't. I
You
think
don't
I'm
want to
not
say.
allowed
Okay.
to say. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I would tell you, but I think that they're yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there's something I want to bring up too, but I won't bring it up now. So is it true from what you know that there is this sort of stress initiation part of it?
Yeah,
Because that's part.
Barbara
Yeah.
talks about that too. Stress inoculation, and then
Yeah.
by the way, Mike, my power's at 6%.
Okay. So we had our little technical hiccup here, but trying to stitch together the conversational footsteps. I know we were talking about the GATE program, and maybe we left off on like this stress inoculation, or like this idea that there needs to be something stressful that occurs somehow to um like, I don't know, ignite the psionic asset or something. Like it does make sense to me, at least thematically, because go back as far as you want to in history, there's always some kind of stressful element to any kind of initiation, right? Like some Native American initiations were insanely brutal. Like some, even like these things that happened in antiquity, like at the Eleusinian mystery initiations, like there's quite a bit of sacrifice leading up to it before you get the vision of the goddess or the divine or whatever. And even, in the stories of a lot of these people who we know to have been part of Project Stargate and remote viewing, like, this guy, David Morehouse is?
Is he a researcher or no? Who is he?
He was in the Army program. He wrote a book called Psychic Warrior that actually got him kicked out of the Army.
Whoa.
But then he later on was, he kind of mended fences with the Army. But he, his connection with psi phenomena, or the phenomena, or whatever, however you want to phrase it, happened during a training exercise where he got hit during a like with a high caliber machine gun round in his Kevlar helmet, and it didn't kill him, but he basically instantly went out of his body. Apparently, when this happened, he was like looking at his body on the ground.
Well,
and then I think the TLDR of the story is, he tried to carry on like he was fine for a while after this, but then eventually confessed to a Army psychologist that he had this out of body experience, and then he had other out of body experiences after, and then he slowly connected him to the program at Fort Meade, where he eventually did become a remote viewer. So it seems like there is some kind of stressful thing or catalytic thing that needs to happen to like wake up these capacities or something.
Yeah, I think there's probably some nature component, and then the nurture component is, I think, often, near death experiences definitely accelerate this stuff. Like Joseph McMoneagle fell 100 feet from a helicopter.
Yeah,
100 feet. Maybe that's a little hyperbolic. I don't know, from or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you think of the body as being separate from the soul but tethered to it, I would say like it's actually not the high stress. It's the dissociation. And so it's like, it's both. I mean, it's associated with high stress, but high stress can also kind of lock you in. And I think this is the pain is so severe that you need to like leave. And and I think that allows for you to for that separation to occur. Sometimes this can happen mechanically on something known as a G-lock, where you're like literally strapped into a bed and then spun around a million times. And like, that's what like,
really?
Yeah. Robert Bigelow is really interested in that. And, so that's a thing actually that one of the guys I interviewed said that he had to undergo. And then, or you could be taking, some substance that like increases stress to like such a degree, hijacks your amygdala that you have to leave. And then all of a sudden you're like floating around in hyperspace or whatever. And then you could probably, once you go out of body, then you have the ability to like do it more. I think that's definitely a thing. If you think about, the Plato's model, like, he would say like all knowledge is recollection. And so like, knowledge of the primordial soul, like noesis or whatever, is like the default state is actually more knowledge, and the sense shouldn't be trusted. And so if you think about what your body is, it's almost like it's a prism, for your soul, but it's almost a prison too. It's like it's a reduction filter, reduction valve. And so
do you know, sorry to interrupt you, but in the Phaedo, Socrates says this thing where he equates, literally exactly says what you're saying, where he says, some say the body is like a prison, but you shouldn't try to break out of the prison, aka off yourself.
Yep.
Like, there's specific reasons we don't do that. I can't say them, but as a certain, he does this a lot, where he's like points to that he's been initiated into certain things and can't say what they are, but he'll say like due to certain sources or certain ways of wisdom. So he says that, but then he also says, some even say that we're in the underworld here and now, and that this is the underworld, and that the true earth is like not this one. And that's in the Phaedo, and that's the dialogue like leading up to his death, where he starts talking about the immortal soul, and like,
That's
this is
fascinating.
not the real earth. There's a real earth above this earth, etc. And the real earth is a dodecahedron. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I mean, you're not supposed to talk about the mysteries. Like Alcibiades got in big trouble for that or whatever. But like I think another spin on the Plato thing is say you're combining the Plato with the UFOs. If you do have this transtemporal other thing that's outside of the cave, like think about like in our linear, space time or whatever. You have like a couple of different timelines. I'm saying two because like they'll just kind of be very, very stark dichotomy. So like one would be that we have like resource abundance, and like the kingdom of heaven is on earth and everything is great and amazing. And then the other is that things get super dystopian. It's like Ready Player One. We all live in these shanty towns. We have to plug ourselves into the Borg or some VR, game or whatever, just to like, get by. And so if you think we're going to inflect one way or the other, because technology itself is a forcing function where, everything is dual use. Think about like nuclear, like we could blow ourselves up, or,
Right.
the energy, with controlled nuclear fusion, all of a sudden, like, we have massive resource abundance in the world. Like, say you were, say these timelines are actually like concurrent, and they're not zero sum. Like one doesn't have to occur. It's not necessarily like an or. It could be an and. Then like if you were like a guardian of the good timeline, you'd probably send people through like a virtue test, and maybe like our maybe what we're in now is this low level simulation for like, and all we have to do is like contemplate virtue and like get dragged out of the cave and like not, kick and scream too much and like enlighten ourselves. And then we become like worthy of like the better word. So better world.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if that's what like, Phaedrus was getting, I don't know if that's, but
no, dude, I think this is part of what I think could potentially be some of the esoteric hidden ontological and metaphysical ideas within Plato, like this idea that, and this is what Phaedrus is about. So Phaedrus is about this idea of soul flight, where it's like you literally like that you can. So this is the whole tripartite, like the three horses thing, like or wait, no, I'm getting it confused. It's two horses. There's a virtuous horse, and there's essentially like a bad horse, like that misbehaves and doesn't listen, and that's like equated to your physical desires, right? It's your eros, and your eros wants to pull you down to earth, and it's like through your desire. The logos is like the driver, and the good horse is like your spirit, your thumos. So you have to take these three parts of your soul, basically control them, and always let the horse that wants to lead you up pull more than the horse that wants to lead you down. So that right there is exactly what you're saying. And then two, this idea in Phaedo of there being this true earth above this earth. He even says something super cryptic, man, where he says something to the effect of, where it just sounds so indistinct from going out of your body and like seeing the reality outside of the physical. He says something like, if one could gain wings, and so first he says, our current condition is basically like the cave, even though this is not the cave allegory from the Republic, but he says something very similar where he says, our current condition is like a little creature that lives at the bottom of the ocean looking up at the sun. It has no idea that if it could breach the water, and see what's outside the water, that's the true sun. And then he goes, our Earth is much like this situation. Like, our Earth is not the true Earth, and the true Earth is like more beautiful, more perfect. Everything is more beautiful and perfect. The people, the ideas, the buildings, the gods literally dwell within all the temples. Like, you can go in there and the gods are literally there. So it sounds like that's what he's saying to me, man, is that there is some way to not metaphorically leave the cave or get out of this crustacean like existence at the bottom of the metaphysical ocean. And I think you could potentially make an argument for there being this soul flight or out of body achievement. Especially, have you ever looked into any of this stuff about they're called the Yatromantis before?
Mm-mm.
So the Yatromantis were these pre-Socratic philosopher sages, basically, that would, like, the most famous one is Pythagoras. He was considered to be one. Parmenides was considered to be sort of this transitionary figure out of the tradition of the Yatromantis into the philosophical tradition. But he was also a Yatromantis. So basically what this means is he's basically like a cave dwelling yogi who would spend long periods of time in complete darkness doing what they called catabasis, where you'd go basically into this visionary state, isolated for a long period of time. And you could apparently soul journey from being, in these altered states if you purified yourself and isolated yourself for long enough. So yeah, man, I think these ideas could potentially all be connected.
Yeah,
and then
go for it. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, and then that world is populated by other things that could also be adjacent to all of this stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And there are different ways to routes to getting there. And yeah, I guess Peter Kingsley writes about those pre-Socratic rituals, and I think Heidegger does too, actually.
Oh, really?
And, yeah, I believe so. And it's yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of, it's the same thing. It's sort of cutting off the senses. And, I'm sure, John Lilly found his own version with the, the modern, LSD human metaprogramming stuff. And I believe, Carl Ruck, Gordon Wasson, and Stanislav Grof were like all really, and then who's the Albert Hoffman, all those guys. Like Albert Hoffman discovered LSD. Well, like all of them wanted to create like a new Eleusis through the LSD stuff, and the LSD and I think LSA are in ergot or whatever. And
that's the theory, or LSA is in ergot. Yes,
LSA is, so it's not LSD; it's just LSA.
That's my understanding. I thought you were going to go.
Yeah. Thank you for correcting. So, but I think they wanted to create this, they discovered this thing, LSD, and it's like, I think they wanted to create like a new Eleusis through this. And that was, part of Grof's intention behind the holotropic breathwork stuff. Your brain is supposed to endogenously release DMT. And so, it's this interesting thing of like, are these transcendent experiences actually somewhat foundational? It seemed like from the Eleusinian mystery rituals that they would undergo them, and then they'd come back and they'd feel a renewed sense of self and primordial mission in this earthly life. And so, it doesn't seem like, it's like if our version of that today is like G-lock spinning beds and stress and all. I don't know if that's like really healthy. But it's interesting.
Well, I think, man, like low-key, my most lofty, ridiculous, irresponsible goal or wish would be that someone could truly recreate like a mystery temple that is not theoretical and actually does connect you with the mystery in a way that is not like maybe or but in a way that is just as universally as loved and appreciated as Eleusis.
The mysteries have gone underground. I think that the people who are exoterically interested in the mystery stuff are often kind of jokey. It's like the if there are real Templars around today, they're not like wearing the suits and shit. Probably.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, but like that would be my bias. And so, you have these weird kind of interactions between, certain figures that, like, they meet each other, and there seems to be some hermetic, transfer of something. And I would look more to that, or to like personal life experience than, I'm down. I think it'd be awesome if we could institutionalize this stuff, but I think not just because it's not institutionalized doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
As well. And I'm sort of speaking cryptically. I don't.
Well, this is the lore. I mean, this was really big around like Manly P. Hall's time, that there is this unbroken lineage that goes back to ancient Egypt, like this hermetic lineage, and that there's all of these. I forget how many, but it's like a shit ton of lost books of Hermes, and that they're being protected. A group of people still has those books, and they're like leaking. It's like the pronoic conspiracy theory. It's like it's instead of like the dark overlord conspiracy theory, it's the exact opposite. It's that there is this preserving, benevolent, enlightened undercurrent that is like being leaked all the time, and there's like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the real knowledge if you're really genuinely badly want it enough. And if any of you are listening, I want it so bad. But I'm also going to need a high bar of belief in my inbox to take you seriously also.
Yeah. I think that this is where like a lot of, conversations like this go, where it's like, is your life being sort of guided in some interesting way? Is there some priestly class above you dropping little breadcrumbs and hints and not showing itself fully, but allowing you to know that you're somehow being guided or protected, or whatever. And these are sort of ultimately unanswerable questions for a reason. They're sort of always gonna cryptographically speak, if at all. And it's like the God of the Old Testament speaks in signs and ephemeral visions, and then sort of goes away. And I don't know, it's this very hard thing to sort of explicitly talk about.
It's impossible, I think, unless you're just willing to make up stories or you really know something. Like, I think Vallée is really the only one who marries all of this together. I guess Pasulka to some degree as well. And I haven't read any Keel, but people also tell me that he kind of puts something similar forward.
Yeah, he for sure. Well, he was definitely interested in the parapsychological consciousness components of the UFO story, as is Vallée and Pasulka. And then, even they, like, if on the surface, it's like they're just hinting at some sort of connection between more esoteric groups or whatever in the UFO topic, but it's not really explicated in any of those cases. Like,
well, they always bring up Rosicrucians, right? Like the Rosicrucians are this somehow privileged, like, I don't know. How deep down that rabbit hole have you gone?
I find it really interesting, and I've spoken to them about it. I don't even know what Rosicrucianism is. It's like it was 15th century German, Christian Rosenkreuz. Is this guy, and he's meant to spread love. And there are 3 books, the Chemical Wedding and the Fama, and I'm blanking on the third one. And, I've tried to read the books, and like they're sort of like really interesting as possible allegories for things that we experience in our, for like, the earth world or whatever. And then there's a Francis Yates book called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, about how some of the foundational documents, for the Enlightenment itself, and Robert Boyle and that whole milieu, were kind of Rosicrucian in nature. And then it sort of trails off. Like, I really don't know, like, what to say of it after that. There are these, like, Umberto Eco or Robert Bauval, who writes with Graham Hancock, or like these guys, or Julius Evola, or, these people. And it's like, okay, it was the Templars, and then the Rosicrucians, and then the Freemasons. And, is there still a tradition today? And I just don't know. I find it fascinating for sure. I tend to think the types of people that are attracted to it for like the totally wrong reasons. Like, it's like you want some sort of asymmetric edge or secret knowledge, or, it's like Aleister Crowley was like really into all this stuff. And like, is that your archetype? He followed this, Gnostic thinker, Carpocrates, second century guy, who said that, if you don't commit every earthly sin, then you won't go to heaven. It was like, by committing the earthly sin, you were disposing of it somehow. So you could like have no baggage before you ascended. So, obviously like a totally fucked up guy.
I think in some ways he gets a bad rap. Like I know people who are a little bit more of apologists for him and are not, like, stick up for him to some degree, because we do, I think we objectively owe a lot of the Hermetic ritual magic lineage and the fact that we have any of it. Like we basically owe him directly, because he was the one who kind of pilfered, and this kind of speaks to exactly what you're saying, is that he pilfered a lot of these rituals from the Golden Dawn that were secretive, because he gets kicked out of the Golden Dawn and then basically recreates all of their rituals and disseminates them through Thelema. But yeah, the thing that's so crazy, dude, and I think that there is, and this is where I diverge wildly from anybody who's like a responsible historian and is like a classicist, is they will pretty much all deny the idea. I don't really know of any other than like a Graham Hancock type or somebody who's coming from outside of academia who will really seriously consider this idea, is that there is this hidden lineage. And the way I think it works, if it exists at all, is it changes names constantly. Like we look back in hindsight and we say something like Rosicrucian, but you can't understand what the Rosicrucians are talking about if you're not deeply baptized in Hermetic ideas and the whole, Hermetic lineage, like, because they use all of those same Western esoteric systems and symbols. And then if you can't understand Hermeticism unless you understand Neoplatonism. And who's the very first person that we know of for sure from a historical standpoint that talks about Hermes in this context? It's Iamblichus. And on the Mysteries, the very first line is something like, it's like a dedication to, or an acknowledgement of, like, Hermes is the common deity of anybody who's interested in everything that I'm about to talk about in this book or something. And then you can't understand that. And so it's just this line of like connected lineages that metamorphosize, but also have these like common ancestors throughout time. So even if, and this is where the pronoic conspiracy comes in again, because I think, the more you drill down into the history, you're not going to find a smoking gun for there being some historical group, and yet it persisted. And there's all of these crazy moments where it could not have persisted. One of them you brought up earlier, like there's one guy who preserved the Book of Enoch. There's also one guy who preserved Iamblichus' On the Mysteries. It's like one guy escaping East Rome with literally like an armful of books. Like if he didn't make it out, there is no On the Mysteries by Iamblichus. And history is just like punctuated by moments like that are almost too miraculous to like believe are coincidental.
Yeah. Well, that's why I would say it's happening. All this stuff is happening on a layer we don't understand. And, if there is some sort of guardian class a la Plato or whatever, like, I would say like, the cave thing is a metaphor and it's not a metaphor. So like the way in which, it's not a metaphor is like, we probably are living in this epistemically limited cave. Like the reality is a cave. And then the way in which it is sort of metaphorical is like the guardians, might actually be more weakly entangled with the citizens or something, because they're sort of like, I don't know. They're creating sort of noble mythology, and they're sort of like, they're acting on like a really high kind of non-interferent, but like, breadcrumbs layer or whatever. And, so I think all these things are like really hard to dissect. And like a miracle is a miracle because it's just impossible to explain in any other context. And, it's like, the William of Ockham, like, it's like, it's the the least number of entities has to be God, because it's too, it would be too multivariant. It would it blows up any other, possible framework or whatever.
I think I know what you're saying. Are you talking about like his like a proof, like a sort of ontological proof idea of his?
Well, like the Occam's razor thing comes from him, or
right. Yeah,
he wasn't saying this necessarily to justify miracles. He was saying, the least number of things responsible for the thing is likely, it. And so that was sort of a justification for God at the time. And now it's sort of a way to rationalize things away, ironically. But yeah, maybe not super apt in the context of talking about like weakly entangled helpers in your life. Or it's really hard to sort of explicate that, but it does seem to be going on in people's lives for sure. And you can tap into it by noticing it and appreciating it more.
Yeah. And becoming, I think there's what's even being hinted at, I think very clearly in all of Plato's works, including the Republic, is that if he's laying out some sort of cryptic secret about the way reality is structured through the Republic, which I guess we should shine some light on this for people who don't know what you're talking about when you say Guardians and we're talking about the Republic, is the exoteric reading of the Republic is essentially Socrates arguing for how to create the ideal city-state. And the ideal city-state is basically autocratic. But the difference is you actually do have pure autocrats at the very, very top, in like these really, really the most brilliant philosophers who truly are completely selfless. They're not doing anything for personal gain. They live a completely Spartan existence. They don't have they're not wealthy. They're purely, from the time they're raised to be the most brilliant, virtuous people possible, ruling over the city-state. And by the way, that's not really what the Republic is even about. This is like the exoteric reading of the Republic. But one potential esoteric reading of it is that I think Jesse's trying to get to, is that maybe this is actually the way that reality is structured, and that this higher class, this guardian class, as Socrates calls it, might really be the next level of beings up from us, or the next ontological layer up from where we are.
Yeah, like is the whole thing like an ideal state, or is it like a metaphysical framework? And there's all this in the Republic, I believe, like he's like, a lot of this stuff is going to be not true or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it fucks with your head, because you're like, oh, it's not going to be true. So then they have plausible deniability. Like it's this sort of, out for them, but it's also this you're going to look even more closely and maybe, you're going to mix metaphor with, real stuff. And, maybe it's not just a map for kind of, more prosaic terrestrial governance. Maybe it's like a metaphysical map. So, yeah.
And then when you consider the fact that the cave allegory is in there, and that's literally what it is, and they're telling you that that's even what it is, that it is an ontological allegory for reality, and as you go up the epistemic ladder, you also go up the ontological ladder, in that when you start, if you're able to function at the level of noesis, then you are literally, you're both knowing, but you're experiencing the higher level of reality at the same time. And there's this level of knowing and experiencing that sort of is one thing, because it's a direct apprehension of something. Whereas everything on this level in the cave, looking at the wall, there actually is no direct apprehension of reality at all. You're seeing like a lower, like a shadow of a shadow of a shadow, basically, by the time it's on the wall.
Yeah.
And they're trying to tell you that that's where you are in this world, is like you're in that reality, a shadow of a shadow of a shadow of reality. And what's higher and the beings that are higher are not in the level of shadows at all. Like you've got to get out of that. And that's also your ego. And I'm rambling here, but I really do think that there's something underexplored in this whole milieu of the UFO conversation.
I agree.
That is like directly in that point.
Well, there's a chilling passage in Diana Pasulka's latest book called Encounters, where she speaks to an anonymized woman who is a daughter of somebody who the woman thinks was in this quote unquote secret space program dealing with UFOs and otherworldly intelligences. And she says she recalls a joke that her father would often tell with his friends at the lunch table, and it involved one word that she seared in her mind, and that word was simulacra. And so yeah, totally. I think there's probably go.
That's too juicy to pass up. But like, what are your thoughts on the secret space program? Do you think there's a there at all?
I said the word secret space program, and that's automatically I sort of cringe because that's associated with these guys like Corey Goode and like these books like you go 20 and back, and you sort of like compartmentalize your soul from your body. I don't understand how it works mechanically, honestly. I don't know, like every time in this topic, I think that, something's like totally beyond the pale crazy. Like I would have said the gate, gifted and talented education, studying psionic acids. I would have said that was crazy 5-10 years ago. And, I'm pretty sure that's real, right? Like there are a lot of people coming out, around that now. And so I haven't really looked into this stuff enough to like, fully falsify. It does like elements of it smell really bad. A lot of the Corey Goods of the world, clearly who are like full of shit or whatever. So, I don't know enough to say, and I don't really even understand how it would theoretically work. Like you'd like compartmentalize a person and then like have some like etheric double float out into space while the person's still present on Earth. I really don't get it. So like I need actually some even viable, like, materialist, reductionist, explanation for how this would even work. Like what is the secret space program? But, I'm open-minded, man. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
No, I don't have any strong feelings on it. I mean, I only know the like the handful of stories. I think most people know like the Serpo story and stuff like that.
I've watched like, I mean, like if there's a UFO program, that's a secret space program, but that term secret space program is associated with like Corey Goode, and there's a documentary, and I've seen the documentary, and I'm pretty generous with the UFO stuff, like where I'm like, I'm going to pan for gold. Maybe there's like one true thing, in a sea of bullshit. And with that movie, I was like, I can't find anything, salvageable here. So I guess I'd say I'm somewhat skeptical, but that's a good way to stigmatize a thing, is like flood the zone with BS.
Totally.
So,
yeah.
And if there was some sort of, if you were trying to like, gather knowledge, so like epistemology doesn't work the way we think it does. Probably there's probably some latent internal, Chomskyan pre-grammar, like something built into the human, that gets let out, right? Like throughout their life and is often, confirmed by things in the outside world. But the idea that we like only learn, from without, and then we like sort of encode it within, I think is ridiculous. Like I think there is such thing as, primordial knowledge. You have all these stories of like Mozart playing piano prodigiously before the age of 5, or like Pico della Mirandola, like quoting Aristotle and Plato, like, I think in 15th, 16th century, like
that's awesome,
in the Medici court or whatever. And like, you have story, like, there are tons of stories like that, these savants or whatever. And so, if we did have some sort of, like knowledge program or something, like, like maybe that would be, there'd be some secret space program around like acquiring more knowledge or something. I don't know. I'm literally, this sounds insane. Like I have nothing to say of real value.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess there's probably the logic based version of it. Like, let's try to construct a plausible narrative, exotic propulsion plus compartmentalized program, or people who seem to be disappeared from reality or whatever. But do you watch Severance? Oh, this is a spoiler. I shouldn't say it actually. If you do,
I don't. So
okay,
you could spoil it.
No, I don't want to spoil it for anybody listening either, because I really think it's like the best show on TV. But fuck, now I can't even really say anything without pointing to this being a plot point. But basically the idea of someone fuck, I really can't say. I'm sorry. I just everybody fast forward a minute if you don't want potentially
There you go.
a sort of
Telegraph it.
indirect spoiler. But the idea of, oh, this person seems to be dead, but they're not dead. They're involved in something else. You know, that like you could have a very small handful of people.
Yep.
There's just there's ways, but it of course it's like it might as well be a novel, right? It's like it's pretty.
Yeah. It's like, you know, it's like if we had a time travel program,
yeah,
how would you even talk about that? Like you have these central nodes through which the time travel program is operating, right? Like these portals or windows or whatever. Likely, I don't know how this would work, but like say that's, you know, the thing. And then otherwise you would have no idea who's a time traveler and who wasn't. And like, you know, maybe it's just like, it'd be this extremely hard thing to corroborate or falsify, or, you know, it'd be really hard.
Are there any time traveler stories that make you pay even a modicum of attention, or are they all just like straight up goofball level for you?
Well, they're mostly goofball level. You know, Umberto Eco wrote about the Templars, and he said maybe they have the secrets of time travel. And then, you know, there's this mid-century inventor I love named Thomas Townsend Brown, who,
yeah, I wanted to bring him up at some
you know,
point.
he did like time is related to, you know, gravity, and he was obsessed with these gravity modification experiments, and so he became obsessed with time travel, sort of, you know, for a lot of his life. So, but like how that translates to systematic time travel, like little time alterations, how that, you know, then you can extrapolate that into like, you know, transporting biological material from, you know, this century to, you know, 500 years ago. I just, that feels, I don't know, that requires all sorts of leaps of logic. You know, I can give you a model for like forwards looking time travel. You know, you have some super high voltage or create some like torsion field around like an inner insulated chamber, but that whole reference frame gets slowed down, you know, which you can do through the mass or energy, but in this case it would be high energy. And then you'd slow down time and you walk out and you'd be like 1,000 years in the future. Cause you know, every second is like 1,000th of a second on the inside of the chamber or whatever. But then with the backwards stuff, it's like you have the chronological conjecture with Hawking and the inability to like add mass and like, you know, yeah, they're all the grandfather paradox, like all these sorts of like, you know, issues with backwards looking time travel. And then my strong inclination would be that, you know, just because it doesn't work with like our current physical models is not, you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it's the physical models are probably just way off. We probably just have no idea. And, you know, maybe there's some sort of multiverse time travel thing, or, you know, maybe it's like you're a lifeline and your lifeline has to be consistent. And so you go back in time and, you know, we're all nodes of the universe. And so like everything has to like rewrite around that, you know, you being a thing or whatever. I don't know. These things are like well beyond my.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, anytime you start trying to understand or conceptualize a perspective that's so far beyond the horizon of our lived experience and what our senses can recognize, it becomes such a mind fuck. You know, it's like it would be like so we can all, no problem, imagine 2D. I can do that. You know, it's like a side-scrolling video game. No problem. And now try to jump your consciousness up from 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions. What does that mean? Like, we can't conceive of it. And obviously, popularly, time is considered to be like the 4th dimension in some model of physics. So now imagine you could imagine what some of the downstream effects of having that perspective would be, but you as a human can't imagine what it would be like to like view time as something you're interacting with. And like, I mean, even taking this back to the previous chapter of this conversation with like the Guardians, like, fuck, okay, what if they have 4D capacities? Like, what if, and it seems like some of the ways UFOs act seem to display that, like their ability to be like, I'm here, now I'm over here. You know, I can in air quotes, break the laws of physics, but I'm just operating on a different level of reality than you are. So it looks like I'm doing something from a 3-dimensional perspective that I'm not really doing. It's just that time and space, I interact with them completely differently than you.
Yeah.
So what it means, or, I'm the only tool we have into that realm is mathematics. That's it. And then from there, I don't know how you ever would make it practical.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Maybe direct experience. Maybe there's some Gnostic, experience of time travel or whatever, and that's all there is. And then maybe get neuralized every time you do it.
but then the trickstery part of it seems to be that it's like anytime. I don't know if you've had any mystical experiences or like big psychedelic experiences or anything, but the punchline always seems to be that the perspective you are asking from gets nullified, because it's like your ego is so just like destroyed or altered that it's like when you get to the unitive oneness, your ego and the perspective you were asking the question from is like nothing anymore. And it seems like there's some kind of, because to be fourth dimensional, right, it would nullify humanity. Like if you have a dimension of your consciousness, Jesse, that exists beyond your physical body, and you were able to experience that, the value of your physical body would just be like, I'm trying to think of a random shit coin that's like worth nothing now. It just suddenly you don't care about that because you unlocked this new capacity that is higher on like Plato's or the ontological ladder. So suddenly your body is just like this old video game or something you don't care about anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's probably some adaptiveness in the forgetting of the primordial self and the opting into the joyful but painful game or whatever, and you have to work out these karmic things over cosmic timescales. And
speaking of the joyful game, this has been a joyful game riffing with you, man.
You too, man. This has been a blast.
I guess we've done about 2 hours.
2 hours.
I mean, you're somebody I could talk to.
I know we could go forever.
We could easily do another 2 hours, but yeah, man, this has been awesome and like all over in a way that I deeply enjoyed. I feel like there's things I should have asked you about that I didn't ask you about, but
well, you can hit me with whatever, or we could, I don't know, we can do it another time, whatever you want.
Yeah, I'd be absolutely down to do another one.
Cool.
Yeah, man, let's wrap this one up.
Cool. Well, Michael, it's been awesome, man. I appreciate you having me on, and keep doing what you're doing.
Likewise, dude. Yeah, you're killing it. Congratulations on everything you're doing.
You too.
Yeah. And I think we're probably, are you going to Contact in the Desert this week?
I am. Are you coming?
Yeah, I'm going.
Oh, sweet, man. We're staying there.
So.
Definitely.